Do you want to work with exotic animals? Are you unsure whether you're a practical, manual person or a bookish type who loves to read about animals? Do you already know you want to work with reptiles and all that involves, such as probing snakes to sex them? Or are you fascinated by primates and know all about the differences between new and old world monkeys? Are you into birds of prey and want to give flying demonstrations? Or do you want to work with what zookeepers call hooved stock, like deer and zebras? If you want a zoo career, this video will tell you how to beat the competition. But before I introduce my next guest, who is going to tell you how to do that, let me thank Peter, Freebird of Reason on YouTube, for mentioning me on his channel last week. If you want to know about bird of prey management and training, Peter is a falconer, and his channel, Freebird of Reason, passes on tips, hacks and memes about how he trains his Harris hawk every week. My next guest is a published author and zoo expert. He is going to give advice on how to shape your zoo career. He is going to present job options in biodiversity venues, and most of all, he is going to give you ideas that you can include in a zoo career development plan. Watch until the end to know about the skills you need to acquire and the personal qualities you need to cultivate to have a zoo career. I started by asking Ray how his career developed.
So the first thing I did was actually up in the Lake District. It was my first qualification. I was a college lecturer for quite a while in biological sciences, including an animal science course. For a while, I was the curator of a rare breeds centre, and that meant a great deal of work with the records as much as actually with the animals. And of course, the people that come to see them, as people are so important. For a little while, for several years, I ran a field station. I worked for the RSPB in London, mainly at Rainham Marshes. I do a bit of consultancy on the ecology side with newts and bats. And my latest position at Down House, Charles Darwin's home in Kent, and I'm recreating Darwin's garden experiments.
What 3 books or people or meetings have most influenced your thinking?
And I learned a great deal about, biogeography, animals all over the world from the David Attenborough books and particularly the black and white TV programs. So Gerald Durrell was the second. I used to read avidly all his stuff, because he didn't have TV programs much. Durrell was very important, and that was mainly because of his idea of breeding animals in captivity in order to conserve them. And he would be around the world collecting unusual animals, learning about them, learning if they could be the subject of captive, care. And Jane Goodall, Ulysses Seal, was actually the guy who was credited with inventing the frozen zoo. He tried to assess all the world's zoos to see how much accommodation they had, and he put together the idea that zoos could probably take into their care as part of an ex situ in situ program in the wild and in captivity, and they could prevent these animals going extinct by managing them in this way. And a famous saying of his was that there is no need for another vertebrate species ever to go extinct. But the fifth one would have to be Armand and Michaela Dennis in East Africa with their Land Rover and taking wildlife photographs. And all that stuff was shown in black and white when I was a boy, and it was all filmed in colour. And I'd be begging the BBC producers and people that I meet to re-release that, perhaps with a modern narrative, in colour. Wouldn't that be amazing?
You co-authored The Good Zoo Guide. What motivated that?
I've always wanted to see lots of animal life. When it sort of spreads to wild animals, it's very difficult to see as many things as you want to in the wild without a massive amount of time and money and travel and so on. So zoos become the obvious place to go. And I have done a lot of international travel, and I've always tried to make it that I'm hitting a zoo on the way. If I go to Singapore, I'll go to all the collections there, which is 4 of them, and the Botanic Gardens. So I would always visit zoos, and I always had a very good reception at zoos. And I could always find someone to talk to about a particular species or project. The idea from Ulysses being that the zoos could work in a much more cooperative way around endangered species and captive breeding and so on. And also they should have an education role. They should not just be an amusement attraction. And perhaps they should be working with species in the wild as well. So the Good Zoo Guide wanted to assess a number of zoos, just British zoos, we decided. So we went around the top big collections of zoos in the country, which turned out to be about 20. The idea was to gazette all the ones that we did. We did a complete list of all the zoos, and we also assessed the zoos for what we felt. I mean, obviously, a bit subjective. What we felt was the visitor attraction. We did a thing for what the science was, whether they had overseas conservation projects, whether they had a scientific arm. Well, we just wanted to make things better, really, and we wanted to engage with people. Nowadays, there are lots of zoo organisations and lots of cooperative work. In the 90s, that was going on, but not to the same extent as today. And people weren't talking to one another, which is a huge mistake. My first job actually was teaching gardening near Chester Zoo. I went to the zoo frequently. I became a member, which meant I could go in and out as often as I wanted to. By having the relationship with Chester Zoo, I felt that I ought to be running the place. And so I got myself elected by attending meetings of the zoo and asking questions and being very interested in things. And eventually, enough of the other members at the AGM decided to vote for me. And so I was on the council for quite a while, and I could see how the zoo was working. Same thing has happened when I moved to London. I've been on the Council of London Zoo, ZSL, which runs Whipsnade and huge overseas conservation work as well. I've been the vice president for a term as well at London Zoo, vice president of ZSL. And currently I'm a trustee of WaderQuest, which is a charity that looks after wading birds worldwide. And I'm able to administer some grants, but substantial, to research very rare waders, and particularly their nesting behavior, because shorebirds are under a huge amount of threat from people invading beaches and habitat problems, and even just sheer numbers. And a lot of wading birds are actually very little known. Now, when I was traveling around a lot and talking about zoos, I did some what I thought were really interesting things. I don't even think people remember the PG Tips tea cards, which had endangered animals on them. I had the Peter Scott album, and he drew the Japanese crested ibis, and that bird was virtually impossible for anyone to find. And by the time I got out to Japan, there were 5, only one of which was a male, and they were in a separate place on an island off Japan, impossible to visit. They found some more in China, only about 7 in a wood in China. And the Chinese managed to keep those under tight protection, and they've bred up to several hundred now, and they've been put back in Japan, which is just as well, because all the captive birds actually died out. But because of all my zoo stuff, I was able to see those, and I've been to Hawaii as well, also looking at their captive breeding facilities. For example, when I went to Hawaii, I've forgotten about this, there were only 11 Hawaiian crows that were known in the entire world. And I was able to go to the breeding facility and have a look at them from some distance away, admittedly. That they found another 11 in the wild. And all 22 Hawaiian crows were taken into captivity. And they've been breeding them ever since. And sadly, they've not somehow been managing to train them well enough to survive in the wild. So reintroduction has to be done very, very carefully. And I managed to see all the world's northern white rhinos in captivity. Also on that trip, I saw every single Californian condor in the world.
What jobs are there available for people who want to work with zoos or with wildlife?
And if you want to do science in zoos, you can look at the Institute of Zoology, which is the branch of London Zoo that does ZSL, that does the science. And there's the zoos in Berlin. They have a big scientific zoo, specifically a zoo scientific center, mainly doing sort of conservation research and so on, or it should, in my opinion, that's what they should be doing. When you say career opportunities, I mean, we should be thinking about how do you get there? And nowadays there are a lot of MSCs, and specifically about wild animals. You really need to prepare yourself to get the opportunity. Think about your training very seriously. Actually, it's very competitive. So you want to be as well informed as possible about the opportunities and as well prepared by the sort of training and qualifications that you do.
Ray, how do you see these opportunities working with zoo animals changing over, say, the next 10 years?
It is possible that zoos will have fewer animals and probably fewer big animals in them. Now, even if they still have, say, elephants, I'm sure they'll still have giraffes. They will probably be in fewer collections, housed in much bigger areas, and probably in much bigger groups. So if you want to work with big animals in a captive environment, it might not be quite so easy. And I think as now in the conservation world, which I haven't really perhaps mentioned so strongly, one is always working with people. It's all about people. If you're running a zoo, it's all about your visitors, really, who pay to come in. So I think we'll still be working with people, but probably much more, actually. And people will have higher standards because there are much better wildlife programs now. There are far more scientific ways of looking at things. People know what sort of questions to ask. And so we need to be able to answer them properly, to engage with people, to get them, helping us with our conservation work. I think nowadays there's a lot of modeling and theoretical stuff goes on, and where that goes towards helping to solve a practical problem, that's great. But a lot of people just seem to look at the theory and publish on that, and not necessarily get their hands dirty by delving into the real issue of what do you do with all these animals, and this country is in such a state, and this is happening there. And that's the other thing is that I think a lot of zoos should work with the range states of the animals that they're exhibiting, or that they're conserving, or that they're breeding. And many zoos have attempted to bring people over from the country in which their animals are endangered or rare or threatened in some way, to train them back in England and let them go back with the sort of skills that they that they can learn. And I think this kind of outreach is going to be much more important. And I know some zoos nowadays are doing it the other way around. They're actually sending their keepers out to Africa to look at the animals where they wouldn't normally be able to perhaps do that, but they look at them in a very practical way in the wild, and that informs their work back in the zoo. So I would look forward to a lot more of that happening in the next 10 years at least.
Ray, what do you think about the current zoo licensing regulation that the zoological collection needs to have a link with an overseas conservation project?
Saying they have to do it, I don't know if I like that quite so much. But how do you get them? How do you get everyone to do it if you don't insist upon it? Good point. I really like it, and I think that's what everybody should be doing. But I can see there may be circumstances where it might not be, really possible. But I'm happy to be called out on that one. Botanic gardens can do it, so zoos should be able to do it. So I think it's a really good thing, and I think the more of that sort of thinking that comes around, the better. The other way would be to be a part of a group that are perhaps doing a reintroduction or doing an overseas project. I mean, when the scimitar horned aurochs was bred in captivity, the founder population that went to Bohemia in Tunisia, they were taken from zoos all around the country, Edinburgh, London, Marwell. That might be another way, so perhaps there is no excuse for zoos not to be involved, because you can always help somebody else, I suppose, who's doing that.
What advice can you offer somebody wanting to work with wild animals?
Okay, assuming you're in this country and you want to work with exotic animals from overseas, you should still know what's on your own patch. So I think you need to know something about your own animals in your own country. Perhaps first, I think you need to be well informed, even from quite a young age. But if you don't start young, that doesn't have to matter. Read lots of books. You can't fail to see fantastic stuff on television. Watch loads of television, but wildlife documentary type stuff and wildlife programs and environmental programs. Just watch the whole damn lot. You can't fail to learn a lot there. Join societies, join clubs, go to their meetings, ask questions, meet other people. You won't like everybody, but you'll find maybe the right-minded people who relate to you. Go to zoos and reserves, seek out the staff and ask them interesting questions. Show them that you're interested. They're not going to offer you a job, but they might remember you to somebody else and you learn something from them. They might offer you a job. God, I don't know. Be prepared to be very, very flexible and be prepared to work with people as much as the animals. And that includes the people overseas as it does in this country. And get yourself trained. We already related to the career opportunities. Find the right course. Get the best level of training that you want for yourself. If you don't go to university, then do all these various qualifications that don't involve that.
Ray, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, have fun.
Ray, you've been an inspiration during this video, and you certainly have inspired me throughout the years I've known you. Zoologist Ray Heaton, thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
During this interview, you've been presented with a possible career plan for a zoo-based career in wildlife conservation with exotic endangered species. Firstly, you need to be a naturalist, knowing what animals live in your locality. Are they there seasonally or all year round? What's common where you live and what is rare? What groups and clubs are in your locality? Is there a badger group? Is there a bat group? Is there a falconers club or a birdwatching group? You should join these clubs and meet people, asking questions. Next, look at what courses are available to you. Be as well informed about courses available and as well prepared as you can be for the zoo job you want. The academic route to doing a zoo science career involves GCSEs, followed by A-levels, followed by a 3-year degree in, for example, zoology. That can lead to a zoo curator position or team leader. Alternatively, you can get GCSEs, then do a land-based college course in, for example, animal management. That can lead to a zookeeper position. For more exclusive content on wildlife, the countryside and the animal industry, not to mention career plans and jobs within the animal industry, please subscribe to the channel, click like on this video, and please share it with your friends and followers. Thank you and have a good day.